your commitment to be here today at one of the last events here at COP in the pavilions. We're here today to discuss from Baku to Belém, takeaways and action items for cities and built environment stakeholders. My name is Ryan Kolker from the International Code Council. On behalf of ICC and C40, we're really pleased to be able to present today's session, which is really an opportunity to share insights from COP29 and next steps as we move to COP30, particularly around sort of the built environment and cities, which naturally are very much interconnected. From my perspective, the amount of activity around the built environment and subnational actors has been really exciting. So we'll hear from some panelists in a bit about sort of their impressions of these past 2 weeks and sort of what do we do moving forward to continue that momentum and really expand that momentum. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Kaz Legrand from C40 to provide some examples of work underway through C40, including the CHAMP initiative. So Kaz, if you'll introduce yourself and share a little bit about what's going on at C40.
It's a bit taller than... Okay. Thank you very much, Ryan. So I first want to start off by thanking NDC Partnership for supporting our event today and to ICC for co-hosting this event with C40, and thank you as well to all of you for being here. We understand just recently that the latest negotiation text just dropped, so I'm sure you're waiting with bated breath to be able to review them, but we really appreciate you spending this time with us. So my name is Casimir Legrand. I work as Climate Diplomacy Manager, overseeing our UN and COP engagement at C40 cities. If you're unfamiliar with C40, C40 is a global network of mayors of just under 100 of the world's leading megacities who are taking urgent actions that are needed to tackle the climate crisis and to drive a sustainable future in which everyone, everywhere can thrive. Our mayors are committed to using inclusive, science-based, and collaborative approaches to cut their fair share of emissions in half by 2030 to help the world limit global heating to 1.5 degrees and to build healthy, equitable, and resilient communities. So C40 engages in the COP process to really showcase the leadership of mayors and to use this leadership as an opportunity to lead by example, to rally support for city climate action, and to inspire others to take similar action. We engage both as an official observer to the UNFCCC, but we also work very closely with our partners in the LGMA, the local governments and municipal authorities, the official constituency for cities and regions to the UNFCCC, to make sure that our priorities and needs are directly heard by the negotiators in the negotiation rooms. Years of engagement, of trust building, and of showcasing of city leadership has really meant that over the years, the city agenda has gained much more momentum at COPs formally. And we really started to see this last year in Dubai with the hosting of the Local Climate Action Summit, or LCAS, that saw over 200 subnational leaders attend, as well as the launch of CHAMP, the Coalition for High Ambition Multi-Level Partnerships. So CHAMP was launched by the COP28 presidency and Bloomberg Philanthropies, and it's a coalition that today is made up of 74 national governments that really speaks to the importance of the collaboration between national governments and subnational governments. So cities, states, regions, towns, municipalities, and communities. This coalition is made up of national governments who have committed and are ready to step up to support local climate action by working with their cities and regions and showing that through this collaboration, national climate plans and strategies can be more ambitious, more inclusive, and closer to people's needs to make sure they have a greater impact on improving people's lives. It is a pledge and commitment that is taken by national governments, so of course it's something that we see championed by national governments, but it critically engages and inspires a lot of local and regional leadership as well. So as part of the pledge, CHAMP endorsing national governments have committed to doing three main things. One, to include subnational governments in the development process and the content of the next round of NDCs that are due next year ahead of COP30, that make sure are co-designed through consultations with subnational governments. Secondly, to invest in subnational climate action by increasing the volume of public funding for subnational climate projects, helping collectively mobilize additional annual funding and increasing subnational governments' access to financing. And third, to implement projects in cities, states, towns, and regions that reduce emissions, that improve livelihoods, and working closely with local leaders and stakeholders to ensure place-based approaches that account for the intersection of climate impacts as well as the social determinants of health. At this COP, we've been really pleased to see some good progress on CHAMP's ability to drive more ambitious NDCs. For instance, Brazil's NDC that was released a few days ago had a very clear commitment to climate federalism. We were especially pleased to see that blue box on page 6, which is a great reminder that in most countries around the world, the distribution of power, but also critically the decision-making, happens at different levels of government, not exclusively at the national level. Some is devolved to states and regions, and some to cities, of course, varying per geography. But critically, the lower levels of government are responsible for the enforcement and delivery of those national policies. And that's why it's really important to note that CHAMP is not just about NDCs, but it's also fundamentally about climate action implementation. And to see how this translates from a sectoral point of view, we can take a key high-emitting sector like the built environment. If we look at a national government, for instance, setting an energy efficiency or a renewable energy commitment, as an example, as part of the tripling or the doubling commitment that was made last year, in order for it to be delivered, there need to be mechanisms, institutions, and processes set up at state and city level in order for it to be delivered. States, for instance, can set up funding mechanisms for cities that allow those cities to procure services, contractors, and to help devise building standards. And also, depending on the level of urbanization, cities can set building codes in a lot of instances. So NDCs that are focusing on energy elements, bring in elements of energy efficiency or renewable energy, really need to highlight the need for regional and local governments to make sure, for instance, when we're looking at retrofitting building stock or creating new buildings, that ensures it serves the people and especially accounts for the most vulnerable. Of course, if you've worked at a national government capacity, you can understand that vertical integration is not easy, but this is why an initiative like CHAMP, working with subnational governments, can really help identify those challenges and can help unlock those barriers that are needed to accelerate action. And a lot of that action is already happening on the ground. For instance, almost 30 C40 cities are signatories to the C40 Net Zero Carbon Accelerator, which is a voluntary commitment that mayors have made to enact regulations and planning policies to ensure that new buildings operate at net zero carbon by 2030 and all buildings by 2050. Another initiative that was launched at this COP is ZERB, the Zero Emission Resilient Buildings, which is one of the accelerators of SCALE, the Subnational Climate Action Leaders Exchange. This is also another project that helps to unlock barriers, that helps foster that partnership between national and subnational governments to look more deeply at how do we tangibly reduce emissions in a particular sector. There was a low methane accelerator launched at COP28 last year. This year's was launched on buildings. So just from that brief kind of overview, it's very clear that we have the tools and we have existing initiatives that can really help scale up that action and ambition that is so needed. It's been really great to see that reflected in the NDCs, especially from the UK and Brazil, and really that concerted effort to push multi-level action to the heart of the to the COP agenda, which is going to set up nicely for strong outcomes for cities and subnational governments as we look to Belém and COP30. Thank you.
Thanks, Kaz, and really appreciate the work that C40 has done in this space. And you really set up sort of the conversation around sort of where we've gotten to today and sort of where we can head to in the future. So I'm pleased to invite our panelists up to sort of continue the conversation. So Kate Hart from South Australia, Kennedy Mathika from Kenya, and Matthew Black from the World Green Building Council. You can each have a seat, and I will join you in a second. But let me start with sort of the first question, or sort of an opportunity for each of you. If you could introduce yourself, the sort of organization or entity you represent, maybe your sort of particular area of focus, and then sort of your current or prior involvement in COP. Is this your first one? Have you been here before? Let's start with that. So Kate, you want to maybe start?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to actually be part of the wrap-up session on COP. We've been walking around this morning, and I was saying to one of my work colleagues, I think it's a bit disappointing that there's this early pack-up I think, everybody starts going, oh, we better head off. But realistically, it's great to be here, and thank you. So I work in a state government. So in Australia, we have a national government and state governments and local councils, and I work for the state government, and my portfolio is very broad, but I actually lead the climate change agenda for the state government. And in that agenda, that portfolio, we look after legislation and policy setting, and also seek to drive new programs in partnership with local councils and not for non-government organisations. My history, I'm a town planner by trade and worked in government and in consulting, and I'm also the state president of the Planning Institute of Australia, and in that role I advocate for new planning policy and responding to state government policy to drive sustainability in the planning system. So it's very important, I think, that we are building sustainability from the ground up, and quite often we're challenged by the development sector in Australia around that scenario. I've been working in the industry for a very long time, so about 40 odd years, and so I've seen a lot of change happen within Adelaide, but also in the nation. And I'm pleased to think that there is shift happening, but part of our issue is age of building stock. And the age of the building stock means that we've got a lot of embedded energy in that building stock, and very hard to adapt the building stock to a more sustainable approach, and then getting funding or processes in place for the building sector to actually re-engineer buildings is really quite challenging. This is my third COP. I went to Madrid, and then Dubai last year, and Baku this year.
Great. Thanks so much, Kate. Kennedy.
Thank you. My name is Kennedy Mateka from the Ministry of Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development in Kenya. Kenya is one of the 54 countries in Africa, and we are doing a lot in that country, which has two levels of governance, one being national government and 47 subnationals. In our end, we call them counties. So we have 47 counties as our subnationals and one national government. Matters relating to participation at COP, this is our second time. We were part of the ICLA initiative back in 2019, where we did participate COP at New York. And there is a lot that has been pending since then. I would also believe that we also need to pick it up, because the initiative that the building sector was really pushing was net zero buildings for all. So that initiative was being championed by Kenya and Turkey. And I would believe that we still have some pending work with full support of WRI. And therefore that initiative, which of course has made some progress in terms of implementation, then calls for us to also see how best we could rework and rethink around the initiative altogether. Back in the ministry, as Kennedy, I work in the national government in a department related to building safety and quality assurance, but also doubling up as the coordinator on matters buildings and climate change. I'm also glad to say that Kenya, together with Brazil, are now part of the leadership to the Intergovernmental Council for Buildings and Climate, where France is the chair. And we look forward, together with our other states, other members of the Intergovernmental Council, to join hands and see how best we can work together. There is a lot that the initiative that was launched during this COP has for us, and would believe there is an opportunity for us all meaning that whether you are from the global north or even global south, whether you are a state actor, whether you are a non-state actor, whether you come from national or subnational level, we are all into this journey together, and we look at buildings as the baseline of having our cities. And therefore, the building blocks of our cities remain to be buildings. So that is why we need to look into buildings differently, aware that buildings form the cities. And I would really like to appreciate the organizers of this initiative, and specifically the NDC partnership pavilion. They have really done a lot in terms of even seeing how best, buildings come out to be, to come out in the NDCs, whether it is 1.0, 2.0, or even the anticipated 3.0. And we'll also be keen to see that and encourage every of our members meaning every member of any initiative, and further aware that there are several initiatives that really during this COP have been mentioned in one or the other. Then we see how best we can have enhanced representation of our buildings in the next 3.0 NDCs. So let's strive to do our best to see that each of our countries' NDC has at least a component relating to buildings. And that will really give us an impetus in terms of conversation. And in earlier conversation, we had also talked about how NDCs influence policies. So most countries really look at the kind of commitment that you are under the NDC framework, and that technically informs the level of engagement with the various sectors in that country on policy and legal frameworks around that. And therefore, for us in the built environment, let's be keen to ensure that by the time our member states submit their NDC, the 3.0, next year, then we strive to have a component, and we need to raise the number of states or countries that have that commitment from the current number to at least the 1.5. The current number plus 1.5 of that number. So that is a message that we're also looking at, especially those of us at the ICBC level, so that we encourage our members. And I believe with full support of the NDC partnership, then we'll all strive to be. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kennedy, and really appreciate your leadership and Kenya's leadership and engagement in addressing these particular challenges. Hopefully we'll have a chance to talk more about the ICBC as we get going. But Matthew.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Ryan, and thanks everyone for being here. I appreciate the last session of the week is always tough. But my name's Matt. I'm from the World Green Building Council, and my role there is that I'm the climate action manager. So I focus on everything to do with climate action in relation to the built environment. And very briefly, if you're not familiar with the World Green Building Council, we're a sort of international network of over 80 national green building councils. So many of you may be familiar with your local national green building council. And we like to say that we're the largest network, sort of accelerating the transition and action towards a more sustainable built environment. And those 80 green building councils in turn represent a combined membership of around 48,000 companies. So hopefully a good representation of the built environment sector and hopefully the impact that we have. Very briefly in terms of why we're here at COP, we're sort of here working alongside colleagues. I think we're going to talk about NDCs probably a fair bit in this conversation, especially referencing the pavilion we're in, but really recognizing that this next 6 to 12 months is a crucial opportunity to make sure that NDCs 3.0 include all of the references to buildings and the policies that we want to see reflected. And finally, how many COPs have I done? I've done 3. I did my first in Glasgow, skipped Egypt, went to Dubai, and now here in Baku.
Great. Thanks so much, Matthew. And I think, we'll maybe pick up the conversation, but I think sort of equally important to the NDCs is the national adaptation plans and really looking at sort of the opportunity to bring sort of climate mitigation and adaptation together, because that's a huge influence or impact of the built environment as well. Let me maybe give a sort of brief intro to International Code Council and why we're particularly interested in this conversation. So ICC is probably best known for the development of model building codes and standards, which often are applied or implemented at the state or local level. And so we really focus on not just the codes and standards themselves, but sort of the ecosystem that surrounds them to make sure that they're actually applied effectively. So ICC this is our fourth COP, but have really been exciting to see sort of the momentum grow around sort of buildings as a key part of the climate solution. So maybe let me start with each of you. Based off of these past 2 weeks here at COP, what are you sort of most excited about coming out of sort of where we are today? And maybe if you have any sort of lost opportunities, things that we just didn't quite get done here at COP, but maybe sort of sets the stage for the future. I don't know who wants to. Matt, go
we can go
for
back
it.
down. Yeah, so I mean, highlights. I think first off, coming to Baku has been wonderful. It's been fantastic. But I think in relation to buildings and the built environment, we had. It wasn't a buildings day. It was an urbanization day on Wednesday. And I think, top of that agenda, apart from the opening plenary where we heard a lot about what's come before and what the plans are ahead, was the high-level ministerial meeting. Kennedy, I think you were participating. I definitely saw you there. But ministers from several countries signaled their commitment to deliver the improved NDCs that we've been talking about, and hopefully have them backed by ambitious sector-specific policy and plans, because it's all very well, like you said, writing the NDC, but then it needs to be followed up. And I think in general, we are hopefully seeing a lot more from governments in terms of that discussion around buildings, that recognition not only of the challenge, but the opportunity that the built environment represents. The opportunity there not only to decarbonize and reduce emissions, but also to realize the multiple co-benefits that can bring, whether it's through nature and biodiversity restoration, whether it's through health and well-being, whether it's through equity, all of the above. We can see such more improved outcomes through going through that process. And Kennedy mentioned the ICBC. Again, hoping that is another lever that people can engage with to accelerate that action. It won't be the only solution. It's not going to solve it by itself. But, I do really hope that it's not just another group that's been created to take action on the Declaration de Chalot, which was about formalizing some of the stuff at the buildings breakthrough. I really hope that, they start getting down to it and they start sharing ideas, and we start seeing some policies off the side of it. I'll pass it down, but I think in terms of lost opportunities, I've been a bit out the loop, but I think, Cass, you mentioned that we're still waiting to see some of the actual outcomes at this point. So maybe a little bit early to see what we haven't collectively managed to achieve. But I think we're all waiting on the sort of finance talk to see what comes out there. I'm not going to speak in detail, but I think we're all agreed that we want to see some bigger numbers, some more concrete work that's going to come out of that, because we all know that we're just not seeing the kind of action at scale that we need. But I'll pass it over.
Thank you. Let me start with the opportunities that has shown us for the last 2 weeks. If you were privileged to have been part of COP for the last, say, 5 years, and probably track how many times buildings have been measured, and you do the same this time round, you realize that the message relating to buildings has been scaled up compared with then. And particularly for the last 2 COPs, there's a lot in terms of, buildings that has gone into this conversation. In fact, most of the pavilions add in one or the other a topic relating to buildings. That is something we need to be really appreciative of. And that is the kind of message any sector would wish to have, that kind of a conversation on and on. So that is something that we are really happy to talk about, and is a great milestone coming from this COP. And this is how even other key and sectors that have really been appreciated before in terms of even funding and financing really started up. So we're in the right track in terms of that conversation and the kind of initiatives that have even arisen relating to buildings and the built environment for the very same 5 years. Then it calls for all of us to be part of any initiative around built environment. And that's also an extra opportunity. And that is the kind of message that we are looking forward, that we try as much as possible to sustain that kind of conversation, even when we are going to Belém. And I would believe from the various conversations that we have had and looked into, that next COP will see more of us going not just at the conversation level, because this is the miss or the loss, the miss point that we have. We may need to find ourselves go on the negotiation table this time around. We have done enough of advocacy and making and letting everyone be aware that buildings exist and that buildings are the building blocks of cities and our towns. And therefore, at the negotiation level, that's where we should look at ourselves in the next COP. That is something that we may have not done extremely well this time around, but I see a bigger opportunity, because if you look at the trajectory of conversations, buildings are picking up, and really we are doing great. So it is always imperative for all of us, as we have this conversation at a global level, that we scale it down to where we come from in terms of our national levels or our countries. We try and strive to do as much as possible, harness local initiated conversations, so that even from within our own nation, our countries, then we bring together the key partners, including our subnationals, because that's where the implementation of issues relating to buildings are. So the much that we learn at this COP, then we strive as much as possible to find a system of, letting our stakeholders at a national and even a subnational level be aware of this. What am I trying to say? Next week, we are having a workshop next in Nairobi to discuss issues relating to, green buildings regulations. We are very particular. We have made we have been operating that as a country, but at a voluntary level. We have appreciated a lot that comes at a global level, but then we have decided as a country to see how best we have a legal framework around this conversation. So next week, we are doing the review and reporting of the NDC findings, but as well have the conversation around the best regulatory framework that is so required. And part of the regulatory framework that we are keen on, having the conversation with the various sector players that we have invited, is how to go about implementing the new building code. And we are further aware that the building code is the instrument of power in the built environment. So let's also see how best we look into our policies back in our countries, and the best that we have learned during this COP and even any other initiatives that we have ever joined as a country or as an organization, see how best, the policies that are in our own countries then can be worked to reflect, the learnings and the lessons that we have got from here. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kennedy. Kate, highlights or lost opportunities?
I think that the highlights, I'll just take a slightly different approach. I think in terms of, to me, one of the significant highlights is mutual exchange of information and best practice outcomes. I think that the focus of actually being able to take information back to our home countries and actually have that baseline challenged. And how do we challenge what that foundation is so that we are driving new approaches? Everybody has a right to shelter, and that shelter is critical to people's health, well-being, and the future. And shelter comes in all forms. And in Australia, we are challenged with our Indigenous community about the form of shelter that is either provided or not provided, and poorer parts of the community through to the really wealthy cities and individuals. And I think every country probably has a contradiction in terms of how buildings are established and developed, etc. The National Construction Codes are applied, but they can be varied across the state or the country. So I think the capacity to exchange policy, to actually identify knowledge bases and actually mine the knowledge so that we can then reapply that is absolutely critical in a COP. Notwithstanding the negotiations. So, we all focus, I think my experience is not necessarily just focusing on the negotiations. I think the everything that sits around us today and over in the green zone is just as critical, quite frankly. Yes, national governments establish policy and positions and support, but actually what happens on the ground is just as important for individuals. We were here promoting Australia and really the opportunity for Australia to host a COP and for my home state to host that as well. And I think we have a really big success story in transitioning our energy management into sustainable energy. And I think from a building sector perspective, sustainable energy within shelter has to be established as part of the first build, not as an afterthought. And so often we see elements of climate change being introduced into the construction sector as the second phase, not the first phase. And I think we need to really shift that approach. I've been over in the green zone. And I really enjoy walking around the green zone. It is a bit of a trade fair, but I think that has just as much dynamic as actually what happens in the delegation pavilions and how we actually engage with people and learn from each other. There's a fantastic model over there of Baku, White City, and the forethought that is going into new urban settlements and cities, I think, is stunning. And there's a new Skyline Airport in terms of commercial air product, shifting commercial product around. And the thought that has gone into 760 hectares of airport structure to support cities and our lifestyles is really great. So I love seeing the thought going into how urbanisation occurs. And I am concerned about the footprint of urbanisation, but how we urbanise the planet, how we urbanise our countries is really important. And I think COPs, there's a big place in COPs to talk about that. We have a huge focus where I work in terms of biodiversity, conservation, energy. Urbanisation is as significant, if not more, because the urbanisation impacts on the planet so significantly, and we have to get it right. And I think, unfortunately, the construction sector has been slow to coming to the party, but we are seeing green concrete, new building products coming through. We're seeing new design of buildings. We're seeing buildings that actually respect the conditions in which they're being placed, and I think we have a role to play in promoting that through COPs.
Great. Thanks so much. All of you really touched on, maybe from slightly different perspectives, sort of the highlight around the sort of level of collaboration and sort of direction setting from, sort of across folks that deal in the built environment, which is certainly a highlight for me. And as Kennedy, you mentioned, it's really sort of picked up in the conversation from year to year. However, the sort of built environment is still very much sort of a fragmented industry with sort of various different players across the entire value chain, with each of you sort of representing different segments of that, whether that's national, subnational, or NGO. How do you see sort of each of your perspectives sort of facilitating movement on the NDCs, and then maybe how can you help sort of facilitate others within the sector, well, how can they help you, and how can you help them to achieve their goals? Matthew, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I think so specifically in relation to the NDC's work, I think World GBC is really trying to get ahead of this, and we've got a specific piece of work that we're going to do over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, and it's called an NDC scorecard, and it's essentially, the first trial bit is going to be 5 green building councils, and the idea is to get them to engage with their members on the ground, their local policymakers, whether at a local or subnational or national level, and bring them together. And the NDC scorecard is intended to sort of say, what have you got? What do you need to get to? How do we figure that out in between and give you a set of answers? And I know that plenty of other organizations are doing the same thing in terms of trying to support policymakers and give them the tools and the language and the policies that we want to see reflected. So I think this is another example of that for the built environment, being led by a few green building councils, and I can't remember which ones off the top of my head at this point on Friday, which is bad, but do go and check it out on World GBC's website if you'd like to know more. So I think that's a very specific and tangible example about how we're doing that. But I think more broadly, especially in the built environment, you mentioned fragmented sector, multiple different stakeholders, very difficult. And I think one of the things that came out of last COP was the buildings breakthrough. Many of us are involved in that in one form or another. And I think, again, the next 6 to 12 months of that process is crucial in the lead up to COP30 at Belém, because my understanding is that we've collectively got to come up with some stuff for that at that point, under each of the different priority actions and the objectives and the outcomes that have been stated there. And I think that buildings breakthrough process is intended to and designed to try to solve some of the problems of our fragmented sector and sort of get us together, aligned in terms of what we're asking for, whether it's on standards or certifications, whether it's on definitions, although that's difficult, whether it's on targets, all of the above, to get that alignment, which then frees up policymakers to be able to say, well, it's a lot clearer now, the pathway is there, we can go and have more confidence in terms of implementing those more ambitious policies that we want to see, and ultimately then I think leading to more action. And then specifically, the other buzzword for the last 2 weeks, apart from maybe NDCs, has been finance, and making it as clear as possible as we can collectively as to, again, going back to that opportunity that buildings in the built environment represents, solving that alignment, solving some of those problems, making it easy to understand and investable, and hopefully unlocking some of those finance flows as well. But I think in all of this, it's always critical. It was probably another critical 6 to 12 months before this COP, but I think especially in the lead up to COP30, another big one and another opportunity that we need to make sure that we hit well.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. And I think the sort of highlighting the buildings breakthrough and sort of the effort to date and the effort that really needs to continue moving forward is really important. And shout out to the leadership of WGBC on priority action 1 around sort of standards and sort of seeing how we can get to common principles and definitions to help support the broader industry. Several other sort of priority action areas around finance and creating demand, and we're really pleased to lead the capacity building priority action, sort of really recognizing that we need both personnel and institutions to help sort of move all of these things forward. So Kennedy, from your perspective.
Yes, thank you. And that is how we look at the issues relating to collaboration and partnerships. There is a lot in terms of divergence that we all have, whether it's within the regions, whether it is within the, the milestones that each of our, our states or countries do. But importantly for us to enhance and engage, I want to look at all this conversation in 3 perspectives. And the first one was about policies. If you look at, the extreme ends of the policies within the built environment, in some regions, especially the global north, there is a lot in terms of advanced policies that are in place. But look at the need for these kind of policies in our global south countries. And this is where we talk about new buildings that needs to come out of by the year 2050. So when you talk about that framework relating to collaboration and partnerships, I do believe our colleagues, especially in Africa and other global south countries, really need to, to be supported, coming up with these policies that we talk about at a global level, and therefore issues relating to coming up with relevant and rightful policies that really support not just the subnationals but even investments, then is very key. The second area of possible collaboration in terms of that support and harnessing the buildings breakthrough and even the ICBC is matters relating to technology. If you look at the same to the global north and south, there is a lot that we can work together to have the interplay around technology, the kind of things that are at a global north. Then we should see how best this can be enhanced at the global south level. And these are some of the reasons my colleagues, especially in African countries, are keen to participate in these kind of forums, so that we also learn, but basically we see how best we can work together to bring technology home. And this is where we talk about value additions in our material processes. We talk about, the partnership that is so required in terms of, growing the local economies in this area. So technology is very key, and therefore, for us in the global south, we're also very keen, especially in Africa, how best, technology can come and support and re-engineer our processes, especially in the built environment. And lastly is the issues relating to capacity building. There is a lot that we are keen on. If you look at the potentials and the abilities of the global south and the global north, there is need for us to bridge the gap. And that gap can only come in when we have a good framework relating to how we work together as a team, because we all have common problems, and to the extent around built environment then gives us an opportunity. Talking about the buildings breakthrough, it has a specific component relating to capacity building. And these are some of the initiatives at that level that we can ride on. So it's also a challenge back to my colleagues in the global south, that we also need to ride on the priority areas that have been listed, especially in the buildings breakthrough. And I also believe, because Kenya is a member of B2, that we see how best we can enjoin most of these priority areas, tap into the pool of resources in terms of organizations, in terms of activities and initiatives that are going from within, so that we learn and we build the very capacity that we also, on the other side, saying that is a bit weak. So the three components, if we look at it regardless of the global south or global north, and work together and use and leverage the buildings breakthrough, and now that we have the ICBC on the table, then we'll be in a position in the next not more than 5 years from today to bridge the gap between the issues around finance, issues around technology, and even the issues relating to skills and capacity development. Thank you.
Thanks, Kennedy. Kate?
Thank you very much, Kennedy, and I think that the very wise words that you have presented to the forum today. There's certainly a significant role through the NDC commitments and to me the global network of mayors, linking up what the mayoral commitments are to their communities and from a subnational government, how do you translate the NDCs into state government positions? I am very fortunate to live in a country where there's a significant stability, that the governance of this country and the state provides the opportunity to establish legislation that is followed. And my government has a a key focus in establishing the right legislation that extends for decades. Our legislation does not change very much. And so if you get the right policy and commitments in the legislation, then they are lasting legacies. And so transferring the commitments from COP into that foundation, I think is critical to demonstrate that we can succeed in having a building and construction sector that reflects the conversations that we have at COP. That we have very good conversations about COP, about biodiversity and coastal management, the health of the oceans, the health of the air, etc. But as I said, the urbanisation of the world actually needs to take those and embed it in what they're doing. And so through government action, establishing the framework through national construction codes or through planning policy, through assessment processes, through requiring the construction sector to really embrace it is important. We, within the city I live in, the government is committing to building 215,000 new homes in the next 30 years. And no, I don't think it is 30 years. I think it's in the next 10 years, because we're all sort of dealing with this housing crisis. And how do we actually provide shelter for everybody? If they're not sustainable, then and the whole of life cost of dwellings is not taken into account, it's a terrible legacy. And we actually have to ensure that the construction sector builds a positive legacy into its product and what's on the ground, which reflects good governance and the NDCs that are endorsed here, so that we actually have that lasting legacy for people in their everyday life.
Great. So the benefit of actually sticking around for the last session is if there are questions from the audience, we'd be pleased to take those now. Yes, up here.
Thank you. Hello. Okay, so mine is not a question, it's actually an observation. My name is Aderonke Adidayo. I work with the government of Oyo State of Nigeria. So that's a subnational. I'm here with a team from the state. That's the first time that the Oyo State will be in COP, this one. We hope to attend several more because it has been very insightful for us. So what I wanted to say was regarding Kashmir's report, to say that we're quite pleased as a subnational of Nigeria that this COP has dealt with financing, and we're hoping that what comes out of all the negotiations will be how subnationals will be set free to sort of follow their own passion and not be tied to the strings of the national governments, which is what has existed so far, especially with the Global South. So we come from Oyo State. It's the fourth largest state in Nigeria. It's got a huge land mass. And, the capital city is Ibadan. It's a city that's over 100 years old. And so it's got buildings that are that much old, some not as old. And we've got a massive building plan going on to modernize the city. And so our needs are different from some other cities. We don't have a lot of water. We've got a lot of agrarian land. And so sometimes it's very difficult for subnationals in some countries to actually fit into the national policy. And we need to get financing on our own strength. And so we're quite pleased that this COP has looked at financing and tried to separate local governments and subnationals from the national governments. That's just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for being here and sharing your perspectives and the important needs of your residents and community. Does anybody have anything to sort of add to that?
Thank you, my colleague from Nigeria. And really, it's true that the subnationals, especially those of us in Africa, really and heavily rely on the national governments. And sometimes it's not forthcoming in terms of, the releases and even the commitments to disburse the so required resources so that our subnationals remain as independent as possible and even deliver their own mandates. There is a program in Kenya that it's called Financing Locally Led Climate Actions, something that the national government initiated, and we believe it's a good model that quite a number of our colleagues can look into that. The intention is to pool financing around climate interventions, but it is locally led, meaning that it's done by the subnationals. So in terms of, and this is delineated from the main national government initiatives, so it is not in any way tied up to how government operates. So this is a different form of, initiative for the county governments. In our case, in our case, it's states. So the challenge can also go back to the states within Nigeria, that you come up with, a locally led financing model, package it, and I believe just like any other national government, that autonomy of our counties or our states or our subnationals is very key. So it's an opportunity to see how you can model a program so that you have a number of states coming together, with a clear vision of the local actions that you want to intervene, and in such kind of COPs, because I've seen this in other initiatives, in some other pavilions, they pitch for funding for that, that block. So it is something that probably you can look into as an alternative funding model apart from the national government's disbursements that you may have.
Great. Thanks so much, Kennedy. Let me sort of end with a question for each of you. We've talked about sort of the momentum up to today. Looking ahead to COP30, how do you see the dialogue in this area evolving? And how can we make sure that we're someplace better than where we started or where we ended today? Kate, you wanna start?
I think moving into COP30, there's a huge opportunity to have a look in this sector around how we respond to Indigenous needs. I haven't heard a lot about Indigenous at this COP. I might not have been in the right spot, but I think there is a growing recognition that their impact, their footprint on their land is softer than ours. And so I think it would be worthwhile thinking about how particularly C40 might actually represent the Indigenous needs and their construction needs. The other thing is, I think the nature-centric, how the nature-centric economy and its relationship to the built form and urbanisation is, for me, really very interesting. And, if we embed that as a foundation to how we live and our lifestyles, I think we would be in a much better place.
Great. Thanks so much, Kate. Kennedy.
Yes. At one point, there is an initiative around let's leave no one behind. And that philosophy is very key, especially for us now that we have gained that momentum of the building and construction process. Leaving no one behind means even our own colleagues, even our own, organizations from where we come from. Let's try as much as possible, embrace that teamwork. And we need to also see more participation of built environment related organizations in the next COP. Why are we saying this? I believe we have enough initiatives for all of us. In fact, the kind of initiatives that we have related to built environment creates an opportunity for all of us. An opportunity to not just work together, but opportunity to also learn, yeah, and try to do as much as possible within the powers that you have, having been joined as a member. And therefore, let's see how best we sell it out. We let as many people know that there is a lot that the built environment has achieved under this COP. Let's try to sensitize and create, that awareness when we go back as much as possible. And the kind of preparations that seems to be in Belém as we speak seems to be ready for us to have, an amplified engagement into this process. Brazil being the vice chair on the other end of ICBC is a plus for us. And being the host of COP30, then is an extra plus for us. So in our earlier conversation in terms of, how we want to have ICBC and listening to Brazil, they actually want to amplify. They want to have more engagement in the built environment. So that is an opportunity that is coming. So we'll be looking forward that we support each other to be at Belém in the first place and create synergy amongst ourselves, aware that we are going home because we are all stakeholders in the ICBC process. And going to our vice chair's host country is a plus. So that itself gives us, an opportunity to see another opportunity as we prepare for Belém. And finally, the issues around the subnationals. The ICBC model is seeing how best we can tap the lost in the pyramid. How do we bring on board the untapped? That is the basis of the ICBC. So when you talk about the indigenous skills, knowledge, how do we, rope them in terms of advancing the technology? How do we bring the untapped? How do we bring on board the unregulated? How do we, move with everyone? That is the basis of the ICBC model. And therefore, we see a lot that is to happen within the next 1 year. If you do the same reflection 1 year ago, when we did launch the buildings breakthrough in the last COP and today, and we look forward within the next 1 year, what is supposed to be, then it calls for all of us to prepare for the next 1 year, to do great things, and we'll all celebrate these initiatives together at Brazil. Thank you.
Thanks, Kennedy. Matt?
Yeah, I think, very similar to what Kennedy said. I think, and I've said it a few times, I think the next 6 to 12 months in the run-up to Brazil next year at COP30, it's about, significant participation and hopefully dealing with those outcomes from some of the initiatives that we've got. So that is the buildings breakthrough, that is ICBC, and leveraging the outcomes of those and the processes of those. Kennedy, I think you said this earlier in the conversation about maybe getting it more into the negotiations, because I'm not personally familiar with how that all plays out, and I think as an organization at World GBC, we're really keen to understand that further. If we're representing this network and we're engaging with policymakers, should we also not have a voice in that room, but get the outcomes of the buildings breakthrough, the things that we're working on, get it up there so that buildings in the built environment are being reflected in that room specifically where it happens. But I think that's it really, and again, as I said, just making sure that we're all continuing the work that we do, the collaboration that we're doing, and maximizing that as much as possible.
Great, and want to thank each of you for sharing your perspectives. I think sort of the common theme is, we're all excited about the momentum that we now have, but there's still lots more to be done. So really appreciate all of your perspectives, all of your work to get us to where we are today. and your continued work to get us to where we need to be in the future. Also want to thank Kaz and C40 for sharing your perspective and your work and your leadership in this space and the partnership in bringing this panel together. So we've got lots more work to do, but really excited about where we are today. So thank you all.